Welcome to Beneath the Surface, the dark side of crime. In today's tragic tale, we delve into a case that blends love, obsession, and ultimately murder. On October 12th, 2012, 21-year-old Shaina Hubers called 911, confessing to shooting her boyfriend, 29-year-old Ryan Poston, in self-defense. But as the investigation unfolded, contradictions in her story raised more questions than answers. Was this truly a case of self-defense, or was it something much darker? This story will not only leave you questioning the truth behind Shaina's actions, but will also explore the psychological depths of a toxic relationship. From the outside, it seemed like a whirlwind romance, two young people falling in love, despite their age difference. But underneath the surface, a storm was brewing that would ultimately lead to a tragedy. Join us as we explore the twisted relationship between Shaina and Ryan, and how it escalated into a deadly confrontation. By the end of this story, you'll be left wondering, could love ever really lead to such a horrific end? Or was there a hidden darkness waiting to emerge? Stay tuned as we uncover the chilling details of a relationship gone terribly wrong. Chapter 1. A Cold Night in October. The air in Highland Heights, Kentucky, on the night of October 12th, 2012, was crisp and cool, the kind of night that made you want to curl up indoors with a warm drink. But inside one condo, the temperature wasn't the only thing that was cold. So was the heart of the person making the 911 call. Shaina Hubers, 21, her voice a mixture of trembling fear and disturbing calm, had just killed her boyfriend, 29-year-old Ryan Poston. She claimed it was in self-defense, but her detachment, especially in a moment of such grave consequence, immediately raised alarms. As the dispatcher continued to speak with her, it was apparent that Shaina was not fully grasping the weight of what she had done. "I killed my boyfriend," Shaina said quietly, as though explaining something that didn't affect her. "I shot him in self-defense." The dispatcher, trying to maintain her professionalism, asked her for the address. "Where are you, Shaina?" 12 Metway, Highland Heights, Shaina replied, without hesitation, almost as if she had been prepared for this moment. "Are you safe?" the dispatcher asked. But it was clear Shaina wasn't responding as someone would after a traumatic event. There was no screaming, no panicked breathing, just the eerie calm of someone telling a story. "I shot him 6 times, she said, as though recounting a scene from a movie. "I'm standing right by him." Chapter 2. The Victim, Ryan Poston. Ryan Poston's life was one filled with promise. Born and raised in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, Ryan was the type of person you would call a rising star. He had a natural charisma that made people want to be around him, and his drive to succeed in his career as an attorney was matched only by his love for his family. Ryan's parents, though divorced, had always kept the family bond strong. His stepfather, Peter Carter, was another constant in Ryan's life, stepping in as a father figure when Ryan needed him most. Ryan's academic success was unparalleled. He earned degrees in political science, history, and geography from Indiana University, and his ambition led him to pursue a career in law. He quickly became known as one of the youngest attorneys in Kentucky to open his own law firm. What stood out about Ryan, however, was his genuine care for others. He would take on cases pro bono, helping those who couldn't afford to pay for legal representation. Outside of his work, Ryan was a devoted son, brother, and friend. He had 3 younger half-sisters, Allison, Elizabeth, and Catherine, who looked up to him as a protector and role model. Ryan had a way of making everyone around him feel valued, always prioritizing his family's well-being above all else. It was no surprise to anyone who knew him that he had big dreams. He wanted to help people, make a difference, and possibly even run for office one day. But for all his ambition and talent, Ryan's love life was a different story. When he met Shaina, everything seemed to change. Chapter 3. A relationship that moved too quickly. Ryan and Shaina's relationship moved at a breathtaking speed. They met online through mutual friends, and their initial connection was undeniable. Shaina was charming, intelligent, and beautiful, a combination that captured Ryan's attention immediately. Despite the significant age gap of 10 years, they quickly became inseparable. Within just a few months of meeting, they were spending holidays together, and Shaina had even met Ryan's family. For Ryan, this was a big deal. His family meant everything to him, and the fact that they accepted Shaina so quickly made him feel confident in the relationship. What started as a seemingly perfect romance, however, soon took a darker turn. Ryan's friends started noticing things that weren't quite right. Shaina became possessive, demanding, and extremely jealous. Ryan, ever the peacemaker, tried to explain away her behavior as simply a result of her insecurities. But as the weeks went by, the cracks in their relationship grew deeper. Shaina would send him hundreds of text messages a day, and if he didn't respond quickly enough, she would panic and accuse him of not caring. She became territorial, especially when it came to other women in Ryan's life, and her jealousy knew no bounds. Ryan felt trapped. He loved her, but he couldn't ignore the toxic behavior anymore. His friends and family noticed how distant and frustrated he had become, but he didn't know how to break free. It seemed like no matter how hard he tried, Shaina's grip on him tightened, pulling him further into her world of obsession and control. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. The summer of 2012 was a turning point for Ryan. He had finally come to terms with the fact that he needed to end things with Shaina. The relationship had become too draining, emotionally and mentally. She had become too possessive, and the constant demands for his attention were too much for him to bear. But every time he tried to break up with her, Shaina's response was the same: tears, manipulation, and promises that things would change. He felt guilty, torn between his desire to escape and his deep concern for her well-being. Ryan confided in his family, telling them how he was struggling to make a clean break. His father, Jay, tried to console him, but he too was concerned about how Shaina's behavior was affecting Ryan. By October 11th, 2012, Ryan had finally made up his mind. He was done. He had planned to meet someone new, Audrey Balti, a woman he had recently started talking to. It was supposed to be a fresh start for him. He wasn't just breaking up with Shaina. He was finally taking control of his own life. That night, Shaina showed up uninvited at his condo. What began as a casual conversation soon turned into an explosive argument. Shaina pleaded with Ryan to stay, but he stood firm. The relationship was over, and Ryan wasn't going to change his mind. Chapter 5. The Final Night. Shaina, however, couldn't accept it. In a fit of rage, she became violent. She accused Ryan of being cruel and heartless, of throwing away their love. She screamed at him, her voice full of fury and frustration, as she threw herself at him, trying to force him to stay. Ryan, exhausted from months of emotional turmoil, tried to push her out of his condo. As the argument escalated, Shaina claimed that Ryan picked her up and threw her across the room. She said she was terrified and thought he was going to hurt her. In the midst of the chaos, Shaina said she reached for the gun on the table. "I didn't want to hurt him," she later said. "I was just trying to protect myself." But the truth of what happened next was far more sinister. According to Shaina, she wrestled the gun away from him and shot him in self-defense. But the forensic evidence would tell a different story. Ryan was shot multiple times, and the first shot, fired to the side of his head, was enough to kill him. The subsequent 5 shots were overkill, suggesting rage, not fear. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. The 911 call from Shaina is haunting in its calmness. She speaks as though she is reporting a crime she witnessed, not one she committed. Her voice is unnervingly calm, her tone almost flat. As the police arrived at the scene, Shaina was still standing by Ryan's body, her eyes wide and her hands trembling. She continued to speak with officers, repeating her version of events, but her inconsistencies were already becoming clear. Her story changed with every passing minute. Shaina was taken into custody, and as the interrogation began, her behavior grew even more disturbing. She twirled in her chair, hummed a song, and made small talk with the officers. There was no sign of remorse, only a strange detachment. "I didn't mean to kill him," she said repeatedly, "but he was going to hurt me. I had no choice." Chapter 7. The investigation unfolds. As the investigation into Ryan Poston's death continued, the police began to uncover details that made Shaina Hubers' claims of self-defense increasingly implausible. In the days following the shooting, detectives meticulously scoured Ryan's condo for evidence, any piece that might shed light on the tragic events of that night. What they found was disturbing. Shaina's story, though initially clear in her mind, was full of contradictions. She had first claimed that Ryan had grabbed the gun and pointed it at her, prompting her to wrestle it away from him. But the forensic evidence told a different story. The position of the bullets, the trajectory of the shots, and the angle at which Ryan was shot all pointed to one undeniable fact. Ryan was seated when the first shot struck him. The first bullet, which was fired into the right side of his head at a downward angle, would have been enough to kill him. But there were 5 more shots. Overkill. Forensics revealed that the bullets came at close range, and Ryan had not been moving toward Shaina at all. He had been sitting at the table when he was shot, the first bullet hitting him as he was seated, and the subsequent shot striking him while he was on the ground. These facts didn't align with Shaina's self-defense narrative. But the physical evidence was just the beginning. As detectives dug deeper, they discovered a disturbing pattern of behavior from Shaina. The night of the shooting wasn't an isolated incident. Shaina had been stalking Ryan for months, unable to accept his attempts to break up with her. Friends of Ryan described how Shaina would repeatedly send him text messages, sometimes hundreds in a day, expressing her need for attention. They even found text messages from Ryan to his friends, warning them about Shaina's obsessive behavior. One message in particular stood out. Ryan had confided in his best friend about Shaina's increasingly erratic behavior. He texted, "She's completely crazy. She's so obsessed with me. I don't know what to do. I'm scared of her." Chapter 8. The Courtroom Drama. The trial of Shaina Hubers began in early 2013, and the courtroom was filled with a mixture of reporters, onlookers, and friends and family who had followed the case from the very beginning. For Ryan's family, The trial was an emotionally charged event. They had already lost their son, and now they had to relive the horrific events of his death in front of an audience. The prosecution opened with a powerful statement, laying out the case against Shaina. They painted a picture of a woman who, unable to accept rejection, had resorted to violence to maintain control over a relationship that had spiraled out of her control. The prosecution described how Shaina had been manipulating Ryan for months, controlling his every move, and how her obsessive jealousy had led to the fatal confrontation. They presented the forensic evidence, Ryan's autopsy, the trajectory of the bullets, and the close-range shots that clearly indicated Shaina's actions were not born out of fear or self-defense. The prosecution's argument was simple. Shaina had killed Ryan in a fit of rage because she couldn't bear the thought of him moving on from her. The multiple gunshots, they argued, were proof of her intent to kill, not to protect herself. The defense, on the other hand, tried to paint Shaina as a victim. They claimed that Ryan had been an abusive partner, that he had threatened her with violence, and that Shaina had acted in fear for her life. They argued that the self-defense claim was valid, and that Shaina had no choice but to shoot Ryan in the heat of the moment. The defense brought in witnesses to testify to Ryan's temperament, describing him as aggressive and prone to outbursts. They painted a picture of a relationship that had become toxic and violent, with Shaina as the helpless victim. However, the defense's case faltered when the prosecution brought forward expert witnesses who testified to the inconsistencies in Shaina's version of events. The forensic expert testified that the gunshot wound to Ryan's head was likely fatal from the first shot. They also pointed out that Shaina had fired 6 shots, which was an act of overkill and not consistent with a panic-driven self-defense scenario. The most damaging testimony came from Shaina's own actions after the shooting. In the interrogation room, she had been calm, almost too calm. As she sat in front of the officers, she twirled in her chair and hummed songs. She spoke about the shooting with no emotion, as though recounting a story rather than confessing to a crime. Shaina's strange detachment during her interrogation only solidified the prosecution's argument that she was not acting out of fear. She was acting out of rage. Chapter 9. The Verdict. After weeks of testimony, the jury was sent to deliberate. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable as Ryan's family sat on the edge of their seats. They had heard everything: the manipulations, the contradictions, the emotional turmoil, and they just wanted justice for their son. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. It felt like an eternity. Ryan's family exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to expect. Would Shaina be acquitted, or would they finally get the justice they so desperately sought? When the jury returned, the tension in the courtroom reached a boiling point. The judge asked them to deliver their verdict. Guilty of murder, the judge read aloud. A wave of relief washed over Ryan's family, but it was tempered by the sorrow of knowing that nothing could bring their son back. The sentence was yet to come, but they had won the battle for justice, even if it couldn't undo the pain of losing Ryan. Shaina, meanwhile, sat still. Her face remained expressionless as the verdict was delivered. She had always maintained her innocence, claiming she had acted in self-defense. But the evidence and the jury's decision told a different story. She had killed Ryan in a fit of jealousy, unable to accept that he wanted to move on. Her obsession with him had cost her everything. Chapter 10. A life in ruins, Shaina Hubers was sentenced to 40 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 20. Her actions had shattered not only Ryan's family, but her own as well. She was no longer the young woman who had once been full of promise. Instead, she was now a convicted murderer, her future forever altered by a single moment of violence. As Shaina was led away from the courtroom in handcuffs, she continued to insist that she had been the victim of an abusive relationship. She claimed that she had acted out of fear for her life, but the evidence spoke otherwise. Her behavior during the trial, her calm demeanor, her strange detachment during interrogation only reinforced the image of a woman who had lost touch with reality. Meanwhile, Ryan's family struggled to move forward without him. Jay, Ryan's father, would visit his son's grave regularly. The pain of losing Ryan never dulled, and he spent every day wrestling with the knowledge that his son's life had been taken far too soon. He found some comfort in knowing that justice had been served, but the wound left by Ryan's death was deep and unhealable. Ryan's mother, Lisa, was inconsolable. She had lost her only son, and the grief consumed her. She would spend hours looking at photos of Ryan, remembering his laughter, his kindness, and his potential. Her heart broke every time she thought of the man he could have become. The lawyer, the leader, the protector. But all of that was taken away in an instant. As for Shaina, her future remained uncertain. Though she was sentenced to 40 years in prison, the possibility of parole after 20 years loomed over her. But even as she sat in a prison cell, she would continue to deny the truth. She refused to accept responsibility for her actions, instead clinging to the false narrative that she had been defending herself. The world may have moved on, but for Ryan's family, the scars of that fateful night would never fade. Conclusion, reflection, and reckoning. The tragic case of Ryan Poston's death is a haunting reminder of how unchecked emotional turbulence can turn an otherwise ordinary relationship into a deadly conflict. Ryan, who had so much promise and ambition, is gone. His life snuffed out in an act of senseless violence. The psychological toll that Shaina Hubers' obsession took on Ryan was far greater than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just the controlling behavior, the manipulation, or the jealousy that destroyed him. It was the emotional weight of someone so unwilling to let go, even at the expense of a life. For Ryan's family, the journey of healing is far from over. In fact, no matter how many years pass, they will always live with the ache of that unimaginable loss. Jay, his father, shared that the most painful part of it all wasn't even the violent act itself. It was the knowledge that Ryan, in his final moments, had felt trapped. Trapped not only by Shaina's actions, but also by his own inability to break free from her. To truly love someone means accepting their autonomy, their right to move on. And Ryan's tragic end was a direct result of a person refusing to acknowledge that right. What makes this case all the more tragic is the truth that relationships, no matter how intense, should never evolve into such extreme obsession. Shaina, in her quest to possess Ryan and keep him under her control, lost the very thing she desired most, his love. She clung to an image of the perfect relationship, one that she constructed in her mind, only to find that the more she tried to mold Ryan into that ideal, the more he slipped away from her grasp. Love, when it becomes possession, turns into something ugly, something capable of destroying the very essence of both people involved. Shaina even now maintains her innocence. She believes in her own mind that her actions were justified, that she was forced into a position where violence was the only solution. But the world sees her for what she truly is, a person who couldn't let go, whose obsession blinded her to reality. Shaina's inability to understand the consequences of her actions shows a deep psychological rift, a rift that neither love nor prison can truly heal. The evidence that came to light during the investigation is a testament to this. The online searches for how to pick locks, the unrelenting control she exercised over Ryan, the falsehoods and contradictions in her statements, and the chilling calmness in her voice during the 911 call. All of these elements point to something far darker than simple self-defense. They tell the story of someone driven by obsession and entitlement, someone who could not bear the thought of being abandoned. As Ryan's family moves forward, they do so with the memory of a son who was kind, caring, and full of potential. His death is a reminder that the consequences of emotional manipulation can be devastating, not just for the victim, but for everyone in their orbit. No one ever anticipates the cruelty that can arise from a relationship gone wrong. And even when justice is served, it is little consolation for a life lost too soon. Ryan's parents, especially Jay, continue to carry the burden of his absence with grace and strength, but they also carry his memory forward, his love for his family, his ambitions, his desire to help others, and it is in that memory that they find both solace and sorrow. Shaina's life, however, will forever be defined by her choices. As she sits behind bars, awaiting her future, her story is one of lost potential, of a woman who could have been someone else, but instead chose a path that led her into a dark corner of obsession and violence. In the end, it is a life wasted, her dreams shattered by her own hands. Outro, a final thought. Thank you for joining us today on Beneath the Surface. As we bring you the details of cases like Shaina Hubers and Ryan Poston's, it's important to remember that the true crime genre is not just about the events themselves. It's about the human condition, the choices we make, the lives we touch, and the lasting consequences of our actions. Ryan's tragic death serves as a painful reminder that our emotions can sometimes lead us astray, especially when love becomes an unhealthy obsession. It reminds us that, while love can be beautiful, it must also be built on mutual respect, trust, and freedom. Love that controls, that manipulates, and that refuses to acknowledge another person's autonomy is a destructive force, and it is a lesson we must all take to heart. For those of us watching this from the outside, it's easy to think of the events as a simple case of jealousy gone wrong. But the emotional intricacies are far more complex. As we dive deeper into these stories, we hope to bring awareness to the darker side of human nature, how small, seemingly harmless actions can cascade into something far more dangerous. Ryan Poston's story, while tragic, serves as a call for us to be aware of the relationships we enter into, the boundaries we set, and the emotional toll they can take on all parties involved. We hope this story encourages you to reflect on the power dynamics in your own life and to recognize the signs when things are no longer healthy. If you're enjoying the content we bring you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us grow our community and bring you more insightful and thought-provoking stories. For more exclusive content, including behind-the-scenes footage and deeper dives into cases, be sure to check out our Patreon. Your support allows us to continue telling these vital stories and shining a light on the dark corners of human behavior. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay compassionate, and remember, there's always more to the story than what meets the eye. We'll be back soon with another case that delves deep into the shadows, where the truth is often harder to see.